I wake up every morning at 5 hours and 30 minutes. It's not a choice, but a legacy of years of expeditions when dawn was the coolest and most productive time to dig. The body remembers, even when the mind would rather forget. Today is no exception. It's still dark outside the window, and I'm already sitting on the edge of the bed, gathering my strength for the first challenge of the day, getting to my feet. Every movement requires strategy. Right leg first, it hurts less in the morning. Lean on the bedside table, pull up the left. Inhale, exhale, stand up. Pain rolls from hip to knee, sharp as a shard of flint. I stand, swaying like a reed in the wind, but I stand. A small victory, the first of many I will have to win today. My cane waits, leaning against the wall, a faithful friend without whom I would not risk taking a step. The wood is polished by years of touching my palm. I bought it in Cairo in 1978 after my first bout of arthritis. Back then, it was more of an accessory than a necessity. Now it's an extension of my arm. The bathroom is 4 steps from the bedroom. I once traveled over a mile of sand dunes to get to the dig site. Now every step is a conscious effort. The mirror mercilessly reflects the truth. Alba Braxton, 83 years old. Gray hair gathered in a careless bun, face mottled with wrinkles like an ancient map with many roads. But the eyes are the same. Blue, clear, having seen things most people only see in museums. I don't spend much time packing. A simple dress, comfortable shoes without heels, minimal makeup. Field life has taught me that. Only the essentials, nothing superfluous. I go down the stairs, holding the banister with both hands. 15 steps, I count each one. The kettle is boiling by the time I reach the kitchen. My house in Gladstone is not just a dwelling, it's a museum of my life. Expedition photos adorn the living room walls. Me in the Valley of the Kings, me among the ruins of Ur, me with a hat and shovel standing at the edge of an excavation in Mesopotamia. On the shelves are souvenirs from all over the world. A clay tablet with cuneiform writing protected by a glass cover. A copy, of course, the original is in the British Museum. Stone beads from an ancient burial site. A fragment of pottery that is 3,000 years old. Tea warms my old bones. I sit by the window watching the street wake up. Mr. Patterson is walking his dog. Mrs. Holland is picking up the morning paper. An ordinary morning in an ordinary American suburb. None of them know that among them lives a woman who has held artifacts made long before Christ walked the earth. The mailman brings the mail at 9 o'clock. I hear the lid of the mailbox slam, and I slowly make my way to the front door. Among the flyers and bills is an envelope with the Cambridge University logo on it. My heart does a somersault as if I were 18 instead of 83. Inside is a letter from Harris Wilmot, my former student, now a professor of archaeology. Dear Dr. Braxton, he writes, though he's known me for 40 years. A recent expedition in Syria discovered ceramic fragments that resemble those you described in your 1983-year-old article. Your opinion would be invaluable. Attached are photographs. I examine the pictures through a magnifying glass. My eyesight is not what it used to be, but I can still make out the subtle hatching on the clay. It really does look like the artifacts I found in the Euphrates Valley. If true, the find could change our understanding of the migration routes of ancient tribes. The phone rings, interrupting my musings. It's a sound that always makes me flinch. Years in the field have taught me to treat unexpected sounds as potential danger. A cave-in, a snake, armed grave robbers. Mom? Are you home? The voice of John, my only son, has that special tone he saves for talking to me. A mixture of impatience and condescension, like he's talking to a child. No, I'm on Everest, I answer dryly. Of course I'm at home. Where else would I be? He ignores my irony. I'll stop by in an hour. We need to discuss Heather's invitation to the barbecue this Saturday. John is always dropping by, never visiting. It's like I'm a stop on his itinerary, not a destination. I'm used to it, though. Since Edgar died 5 years ago, I've become something of a chore for my son. Something to be done between work and golf. I managed to boil fresh tea and even bake simple oatmeal cookies for his arrival. John doesn't appreciate my baking. Pris keeps him on a diet, but I bake anyway. It reminds me of the times when my little boy would wait impatiently for me to take the tray out of the oven. That little boy is long gone, leaving in his place a 59-year-old man with a budding bald spot and permanently furrowed eyebrows. John enters without knocking as usual. Tall in a business suit, he looks foreign in my house, filled with antiquities and memories. Mom, he kisses my cheek without leaning in. I have to tiptoe up, which makes my knees ache. You look good. It's the standard phrase he says without looking at me. His eyes are already roaming the room, searching for signs of my failure. Unwashed dishes, dust on the shelves, anything that would confirm his belief that I'm not doing a good job on my own. Tea? I suggested, already pouring. Only if it's sugar-free, he replies, though he knows I always serve him tea without sugar. We sit down in the living room, John on the edge of the couch as if ready to jump off at any moment, and me in my favorite chair with armrests that help me stand up. So, barbecue, John begins, sipping his tea. Saturday, 3 o'clock. Heather really wants you to come. We both know that's a lie. Heather, my granddaughter, barely even remembers I exist. But that's the rules of the game. Pretend we're a normal, loving family. I got an interesting letter today, I say, pointing to an envelope from Cambridge. Harris Wilmot is asking for my advice on a new find. John casts a fleeting glance at the letter. That student of yours? He asks without much interest. What have you found this time? Another old bone? Ceramic fragments, I answer, trying not to show irritation. They might confirm my theory about trade routes. Mom, John interrupts, looking at his watch. Can you be at the barbecue? Milo will be there too. He hasn't seen you in a while. Milo, my grandson, the only family member who sometimes calls just for fun, not because there's something to discuss or report. Sure, I'll be there, I agree. Do I need to bring anything? No, you don't need anything, John replies quickly. The last time I brought a homemade pie to a family gathering, Pris defiantly set it aside, citing unknown ingredients. I'll pick you up at 2:30, John adds, standing up. Don't you need anything? This is also a ritual question. The correct answer is, no, thanks, I've got everything. Any other answer will make John angry, which he'll try to hide, but I'll see it anyway. Actually, I decide, I need to go to the drugstore to get new batteries for my hearing aid. John wrinkles his nose as if I'd asked him to escort me to the moon. Mom, I have an important meeting today. How about tomorrow? Or can you order delivery? Sure, I smile. I was just kidding. I have backups. It's a lie, but it saves us both a lot of embarrassment. John nods in relief, kisses my cheek again, and leaves, promising to call tomorrow. We both know he won't call. The door closes and the house fills with silence again. I turn back to Harris's letter. This is where real life is, I think. There's more warmth and humanity in these clay fragments than a visit from my own son. I sit down at my old Underwood typewriter. I have a computer, but my fingers, twisted by arthritis, do better with mechanical keys. I start typing a reply to Harris, outlining my thoughts on the find. The tapping of the keys fills the room with a rhythmic sound that reminds me of the times I used to write field reports by the light of a kerosene lamp. Memories wash over me in a wave. Edgar leaning over the excavation, his tanned hands gently brushing sand off what would turn out to be a bronze dagger. Our first expedition together, Syria, 1967. I was a young graduate student. He was an already renowned archaeologist. When we found the royal tomb at Tel Khalifa, it was I who first noticed the unique ornamentation on the walls, which changed the dating of the entire complex. Edgar never hid my merits, always listing me as a co-author in publications, even when it caused raised eyebrows from his colleagues. Alba sees what others miss, he would say at conferences. And there was pride in his voice. In our house, there was never a division between men's and women's work. When John was born, we took turns taking him to lectures while the other was excavating. As he grew older, he would join us on expeditions. I remember 8-year-old John holding a shard of ancient pottery with burning eyes. Mom, I'm going to be an archaeologist too, he promised. But something changed in adolescence. John became ashamed of our odd jobs, our long absences, our house filled with books and artifacts instead of fancy furniture. He chose the most normal profession he could find, accounting. Married Pris, as down-to-earth and pragmatic as he was. And he started looking at Edgar and me as eccentric old men wasting our lives on useless excavations. Edgar died of a heart attack right in the field at the age of 80, doing what he loved most. His last words were, "Alba, look, there's something shiny over there." I didn't get to see exactly what he noticed in the sand. After he died, John insisted that I move closer to him and Pris. "You need supervision, Mom," he said, as if I were a child or a pet. I agreed to move to Gladstone, but insisted on a house of my own. Small, but mine. I finished the letter to Harris, reread it, and put it in the envelope. "I'll take it to the post office tomorrow. It'll be a good excuse for a walk. My legs aren't the same anymore, but the doctor says movement is essential." I spend the evening going through old photo albums. Here's John holding his newborn daughter, Heather. Here's Milo at his high school graduation. Here's Edgar and I at a dig in Egypt, both tanned to black gray hair fluttering in the wind. Happy. Sleep doesn't come right away. I lie in the dark, listening to the ticking of the clock and thinking about the upcoming barbecue. Part of me wants to back out, citing poor health. But the other part, the part that has spent half her life in the sands and dust, overcoming heat, cold, and physical exhaustion, reminds me that Alba Braxton is not one to back down in the face of difficulty, even if that difficulty is her own family. Saturday came all too quickly. I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't put down to arthritis or age. A premonition is what it was. In my 83 years of life, I'd learned to trust my intuition. It was the one that led me to the hidden entrance to the tomb at Deir el-Bahri when all other explorers had passed by. Today she was shouting, "Stay home." But I didn't listen. I chose a light blue cotton dress, dressy enough for a family event, but still comfortable. I had to struggle with the jewelry. My fingers are not so good with clasps anymore. I settled on the silver brooch Edgar had given me for our 30th anniversary. A small silver scarab with turquoise inlays, a replica of the real artifact we'd found together. John picked me up at 2:30 sharp. Such punctuality was a legacy of his upbringing. Edgar had always said, in archaeology, as in life, being late can cost you a fine. Except his son applied that principle to accounting, not digging. "Ready, Mom?" he asked, barely crossing the threshold. His eyes slid over me with an appraising gaze. "Are you wearing that? It's going to be hot." "I spent 2 decades in the desert, John," I said dryly. "I think I can handle the heat in the suburbs of Gladstone." He shrugged, a gesture I'd learned to interpret as, "No use arguing with an old woman," and picked up my bag. Small, but heavy because of a gift from my great-granddaughter. I'd found an antique music box, restored it, and filled it with little treasures-colored pebbles I'd brought from all over the world. Each one with a story that 4-year-old Leela is unlikely to appreciate now, but perhaps someday. The drive to Heather's house took 20 minutes. John drove silently, occasionally responding to my attempts at conversation with one-word phrases. I told him about the letter from Harris, about the possible importance of the new find. He nodded with that peculiar detachment that spoke more clearly than words. He wasn't interested. Heather and her husband Nate's house is a typical manifestation of the American dream as envisioned by the younger generation. 2 stories, with an immaculately manicured lawn and a playground in the backyard. A 2-car garage, a patio with a barbecue, a pool. Not big, but enough to impress the neighbors. When we pulled up, the party was already in full swing. Parked cars filled the driveway and part of the street. John helped me out of the car, more out of a sense of obligation than concern. His hand under my elbow was tense, as if he was afraid I might collapse at any moment. "Try not to bore everyone with your stories about the dig," he warned as we approached the house. Nate's friends from the office would be here. Regular people. Unlike you. The words weren't spoken, but I heard them clearly. In his voice was the same embarrassment I'd seen on his face as a teenager, when he'd asked me not to wear those weird ethnic things to school assemblies. Heather met us at the door with a strained smile and an air kiss that didn't touch my cheek. "Grandma, you made it!" she exclaimed with feigned enthusiasm. "How wonderful! Everyone is already in the yard. Come on in." As I followed her through the house, I noticed that none of my pictures or gifts were visible in her impeccably decorated rooms. Nate's parents' family photos took pride of place on the mantelpiece. The backyard was a maze for a man with a cane. Uneven lawn, scattered children's toys, wicker chairs spaced too close together. Every step required concentration. I walked slowly forward, leaning on my cane, feeling it sink into the soft earth. No one offered me a helping hand. No one even noticed my predicament. Pris sat in a circle of women discussing a new fitness club. She nodded at me without interrupting the conversation. Milo, my grandson, was busy tuning up the music. He spotted me and waved, but didn't approach. Nate was bustling around the grill, surrounded by men with bottles of beer. I made my way to the nearest available chair and carefully lowered myself onto it, trying not to wrinkle my aching knees. Leela, my great-granddaughter, was playing with the other children in the far corner of the yard. I waved at her, but she was too engrossed to notice. "Here you go." John handed me a glass of lemonade. "Just don't spill it." It was like I was a clumsy child, not a woman holding fragile artifacts thousands of years old. I accepted the glass with a smile that hopefully didn't reflect my bitterness. The time dragged slowly. The conversations around me touched on topics I couldn't participate in. Office gossip, the latest car models, political debates that seemed to be conducted in a language other than English. I sat watching everyone like an anthropologist watching an unknown tribe, trying to decipher their customs and rituals. Finally, Milo sat down next to me, holding a plate of food. "Grandma, how are you? It's been a long time." His eyes, Edgar's eyes, attentive and intelligent, looked at me with genuine interest. Of the whole family, only Milo had inherited that trait, the ability to really see the person he was talking to. "I got a letter from Cambridge," I said, glad for the opportunity to share. "Do you remember Professor Wilmot? He's asking for my advice on a new find." "Really?" Milo looked impressed. "What's the find?" I began to tell him about the ceramic fragments, about the possible revision of trade routes, about the significance of this discovery for understanding the migration of ancient peoples. Milo listened, asking questions that showed his understanding. As a kid, he was the only one who asked to bring him not souvenirs, but history books from my trips. "Still loading people up with your old bones, Mom?" John's voice interrupted our conversation. He was standing over us, holding a bottle of beer, with that condescending smile he saved for when he wanted to put me in my place. "I was telling Milo about the inquiry from Cambridge," I replied calmly. "Bones, shards, dusty books." John shook his head, turning to Milo. "She was always obsessed with that stuff. When I was a kid, my friends thought my parents were coffin diggers." "Technically," Milo interjected. "Archaeologists?" Yeah, I know," John said. "But seriously, Mom, no one here wants to hear about artifacts that are 1,000 years old. Why don't you tell me how you like the new security system I installed in your house?" "It's working fine," I lied. In fact, I'd turned it off the first day. The constant audible alerts were driving me crazy. John nodded and walked away, and Milo apologized and left, saying he had to help Nate with the grill. I was alone again. The heat was becoming unbearable. My hearing aid began to whistle, a sign of a low battery. I discreetly turned up the volume, but it didn't help. Now the conversations around me sounded distorted, as if they were coming from underwater. I decided to walk over to Leela to give her the gift. As I rose from my chair, I felt dizzy, a combination of heat, fatigue, and probably the medication I'd taken that morning. Leaning on my cane, I moved slowly across the courtyard. The pool was enclosed by a low decorative fence. I was walking around it when I heard John's voice. "Hey, Mom, you want to go swimming?" I turned around, and that's when I felt a nudge in my back. Strong, firm, not a casual touch. My cane slipped from my hand. The world turned upside down. The water hit like a concrete wall. Cold, shock, panic. I submerged completely, my clothes soaking wet and pulling me down. The hearing aid let out a piercing squeak, then went silent. The chlorinated water stung my eyes, filled my nose and mouth. I tried to dive out, but my arthritic arms and legs wouldn't budge. The heavy dress wrapped around my legs like a shroud. By some miracle, I floated to the surface, gulping for air. Through the haze in my eyes, I saw faces turned toward me. Laughing faces. John stood at the edge of the pool, holding my cane, grinning broadly. "Cool off, Mom!" he shouted, and everyone around burst into laughter. I tried to grasp the edge, but my fingers slipped. Every movement made my joints ache. The cold water made my arthritic knees and hips ache worse. I couldn't get out on my own. "Help!" I whispered, but no one heard or wanted to hear. The laughter continued. Someone was filming what was happening on their cell phone. I heard snippets of commentary, like a mermaid, an old sea witch. Somebody throw her a life preserver. The humiliation stung worse than the chlorine in my eyes. I, Alba Braxton, whose name is in archaeology textbooks, whose discoveries changed the understanding of ancient civilizations, was floundering in the pool like a circus monkey for the crowd's amusement. Suddenly, Milo was there. Without a word, he jumped into the pool, fully clothed, and pulled me under his arms. "Hold on to me, Grandma," he said quietly so that only I could hear. "I'll pull you out." With his help, I finally got out of the water. Milo handed me to Nate, who, to his credit, helped me onto the nearest lounge chair. The laughter died down, replaced by awkward coughs and fake expressions of concern. "God, Mom, it was a joke." John came over with a towel. "You were always so dramatic." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Water dripped from my gray hair, from my nose, from my chin. The dress clung to my body, outlining the aging thinness I usually carefully hid under loose clothing. The scarab brooch was gone, washed away by the water, as was my dignity. Heather fussed nearby, pretending to be concerned. "Grandma, I need to change. I have some things that will fit you." "I want to go home," I said, and my voice sounded foreign even to myself. "But we haven't had dessert yet," Heather objected. "And Leela wanted to show you her new bike." "I want to go home," I said harder. "Now." There was silence. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, an old woman, wet and shivering, demanding to be taken away from the family party. I could see the judgment in their eyes, as if I had ruined the fun rather than being the victim of a cruel joke. "I'll drive you, Grandma," Milo offered, still soaking wet. "Don't be silly," John intervened. "You're the owner of a computer game for children. I'll take her." He was talking about me in the third person, as if I wasn't here, or as if I were an inanimate object that needed to be moved from one place to another. Milo helped me up. My cane, which someone had brought, was wet and slippery in my hand. I leaned on my grandson, feeling my legs shaking. The pain in my joints had become almost unbearable. The hearing aid was silent, probably ruined by the water. "Here's your bag, Grandma." Milo handed me my bag, which was also soaked. The gift for Leela was probably ruined. I nodded, unable to speak. We moved slowly toward the exit. I heard Pris say to someone, "She's always been like that. Likes to make a scene." And chuckles in response. John walked ahead without turning around. His back expressed irritation with all its tense curves. He didn't offer me his hand, didn't ask how I was feeling. He simply walked toward the car as if he were performing an unpleasant duty. As we passed the children's corner, Leela ran up to me. "Grandma Alba, why are you wet?" Her innocent question made me stop. I looked into her eyes, Edgar's eyes, like Milo's, and tried to smile. "I fell in the pool, honey. It's no big deal." "How's the mermaid?" she asked with childlike directness. "Yes, like a very old mermaid," John answered for me with a fake chuckle. "Grandma needs to go home to dry off." Milo gave his father a sharp look, but he didn't say anything. We continued on our way to the car. Every step hurt my frozen joints. My wet clothes clung to my skin, making me shiver despite the heat. John opened the passenger seat door. "Wait," Milo said. "I'll get a dry towel to put on the seat." "Don't make a fuss," John said. "The car will survive." I got into the car, feeling the water from my clothes soaking into the leather seat. Another small humiliation in the chain of today's events. Milo leaned out the open window. "I'll call you tomorrow, Grandma," he promised. "I'll check on you." I nodded, grateful for his concern, but too exhausted to put it into words. John got behind the wheel and started the car. We pulled away under the gazes of the guests gathered in the driveway. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see their faces. Curious, indifferent, or worse, pitiful. We drove in silence. I was shivering more and more, my wet clothes keeping me warm even in the warm car. "Turn on the heat, please," I asked. "In June?" John looked at me like I was crazy. "Are you cold?" "I'm soaked to the skin and freezing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed but turned on the heat. "Look, Mom," he began after a pause. "It was just a joke. Everyone was laughing. If you had just laughed with everyone else instead of making a drama." I stayed silent, staring out the window at the houses floating by. So neat, so identical, like the people living in them. "Everyone had a great time," John continued. "Heather had worked so hard to organize the party, and you ruined it with your overreaction." I turned to him, feeling the anger building inside me, hot despite the chill. "You pushed me into the pool, John. My 83-year-old mother with arthritis and a hearing aid." "It was a light push," he objected. "And it was a shallow pool. You always exaggerate things. I could have hit my head on the edge. I could have drowned. My hearing aid is ruined. See? You're dramatizing. It's no big deal. And I'll buy you a new hearing aid." He said it in the tone of a man offering great generosity, as if he wasn't the cause of the breakage. The rest of the drive was silent. When we pulled up to my house, John didn't turn off the engine, a clear sign that he wasn't going in. "Can you handle it?" he asked formally. "As always," I answered, opening the door. I got out of the car, still shivering in my wet clothes. John didn't even wait for me to get to the door. He left as soon as I closed the car door. Standing on the doorstep of my house, I felt shipwrecked, wet, shivering, tossed onto the shore of a life that went on without me. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered, do I even need to come back to this life? To a family where I was disrespected, unappreciated, and unloved? I spent the first 3 days after the pool incident in bed. The cold attacked me with a ferocity that only someone in their 80s can understand. High fever, chills, sore throat, and a cough that seemed to tear my old lungs apart. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the heartache. In the bathroom mirror, I examined my body, covered in bruises, dark purple on my thighs, yellowish green on my arms. Skin at my age is as thin as papyrus and just as easily damaged. The hip I hit the side of the pool was swollen and ached with every movement. Arthritis aggravated by the cold water had turned my joints into pockets of constant throbbing pain. The hearing aid, as I had suspected, was hopelessly ruined. The world around me became muffled, as if I were under a glass hood. I could hear loud noises, the telephone ringing, the knocking on the door, but my normal speech became a mumbled mess. I caught myself thinking that maybe it was for the best. At least I wouldn't hear John's derisive comments or Pris's condescending tone. On the fourth day, I forced myself to get up and get dressed. Every movement resonated with pain, but I couldn't afford the luxury of inaction. 83 years had taught me one thing. If you surrender to illness or old age even a day longer than necessary, they can take weeks or months off your life. I worked in the fields with fractures, with malaria, with sunburns covering every inch of exposed skin. I wasn't going to let a few bruises and a cold beat me. I made strong tea with honey and lemon, a recipe my mother still used, and sat down at the desk. The answer to Harris still lay there, unfinished. I reread it and cringed at a few typos. My fingers, twisted by arthritis and shaking with weakness, were struggling with the typewriter keys. The phone rang when I was halfway down the page. The sound was loud enough that I could hear it even without a hearing aid. Milo's name popped up on the display. "Grandma?" His voice was muffled, but I could still make out the words. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better," I answered honestly. "But I'll survive. I wanted to stop by, but I've been swamped with work. I'm sorry." His apology sounded sincere, and I felt a pang of guilt that I'd unwittingly compared him to John, who hadn't called once since that day. "It's okay, honey. I'm fine. Dad said you refused to take his calls." I grinned. Of course, John had portrayed it as if I was a resentful old woman ignoring his attempts at reconciliation. In reality, he hadn't called. "It's hard to answer calls that didn't happen," I said. "And anyway, my hearing aid is broken. I can barely even hear you." "Shit, I forgot about that. Dad says he'll buy you a new one. He says a lot of things." There was an awkward pause. I knew Milo was in a difficult position between his father and his grandmother. He always tried to remain neutral in our conflicts, which, given John's character, was a wise decision. Do you have a bad cold? Milo changed the subject. It's nothing serious, just a cold. At my age, any infection seems like the end of the world, but I've been through worse. I'm sorry about that, Grandma. It was a cruel joke. His words, the first admission that what had happened wasn't harmless fun, made my eyes fill with tears. I quickly blinked them away, even though Milo couldn't see me. Thank you, darling. It means a lot to me. We talked some more about his job, about his girlfriend Rachel, about his plans for the summer. When we finished talking, I felt a little better. At least one family member saw me as a person, not a burden. By the end of the week, I had almost recovered from my cold, although my arthritis was still bothering me more than usual. I decided it was time to get a hearing aid. My audiologist, Dr. Chen, couldn't see me until 3 days later, but I was grateful for that. It turned out that my old hearing aid was beyond repair, and a new one would cost $2,000. Insurance only covered a small portion of the amount. We can offer you an installment plan, Dr. Braxton, the assistant said as she placed the order. Dr. Braxton. That address always warmed my heart. A reminder of a time when my expertise was valued, when I wasn't just John's old mom, but a respected scientist. I wrote a check for the down payment and arranged a date for my next visit to have the new machine adjusted. On the cab ride home, I pondered what I should do about John. Part of me wanted to just let the situation go, pretend that nothing had happened, for the sake of maintaining the appearance of a family relationship. But the other part, the same part that kept me digging when everyone else was ready to give up, demanded a conversation. The solution came in the form of a ringing doorbell on Sunday morning. I was just finishing my breakfast when I heard a muffled sound. Leaning on my cane, I slowly made my way to the door, wincing at the pain in my hip. John was standing on the doorstep. He was holding a paper bag, which he held out to me as soon as I opened the door. Hi, Mom. I brought you some Parker buns, the cinnamon ones you like. It was his way of apologizing, not with words, but with gestures that could be interpreted any way he wanted. I accepted the package and stepped back, allowing him to enter. You look better, he remarked, walking into the living room. Milo said you were sick. A cold, I answered briefly. It's what happens when you get wet in the pool. John wrinkled his nose, but ignored the innuendo. I've called you several times. My hearing aid is broken. I can't hear calls unless I'm near the phone. Oh, yes. He had the nerve to look surprised. I forgot. I need to buy you a new one. Already ordered one, I said. I'll have it in a week. How much is it? I'll pay for it. I looked at my son carefully. He avoided my gaze, studying the pictures on the wall as if he were seeing them for the first time. $2,000, I answered. John whistled. Wow, that's not cheap. Maybe there are easier options? This is the easy option, John. A good hearing aid costs $5,000 and up. Okay, he finally looked at me. I'll write you a check. No need, I said. I'd already made the first payment and arranged for an installment plan. Mom, don't be silly. Let me pay. After all, he stammered. Your fault? I finished for him. John sighed with that particular expression I knew all too well, a mixture of irritation and condescension. Here we go again. How much drama can we get over a stupid joke? A stupid joke? I could feel the anger rising inside. You pushed me into the pool, John. Your 80-year-old mother with arthritis. It was a gentle push. And everyone laughed. If you just laughed with everyone else instead of making a scene. A scene? I couldn't believe my ears. I almost drowned. Don't exaggerate, Mom. Heather's pool is 4 feet deep. It's impossible to drown in there. For a healthy person, yes. For an old woman with arthritis who can't get out on her own, yes. John shook his head as if he were talking to an unintelligent child. You're always dramatizing everything, always making a big deal out of everything. Remember how you got hysterical when I accidentally broke that clay thing from Egypt? That clay thing was dated to the 2nd millennium BC, I countered. It was historically priceless. See, it's always the same. Anything that has to do with your bones and shards is more important than living people, more important than your own son. I closed my eyes, feeling the old pain rising from the depths of memory. John had always accused Edgar and me of loving archaeology more than him, that we dragged him around on expeditions instead of living a normal life, that we embarrassed him in front of his friends with our weird talk about ancient civilizations. "We always put you first, John," I said quietly, even when it meant abandoning important expeditions or promising projects. "Really?" His voice was dripping with sarcasm. "What about my 13th birthday when you and your father went to Turkey to dig? Or your high school graduation, which you were 2 hours late for because your father insisted you go to some shitty museum?" I wanted to object, to remind him that for his 13th birthday, we'd organized a trip to Disneyland for him, and that we'd been late for his graduation because of a delayed flight, not a museum. But I knew it was futile. Over the years, John had constructed his own version of our family history, where he was the victim and Edgar and I were the heartless parents who favored our careers over our son. "Okay," John said, seeing that I wasn't talking. "Let's not bring up the past again. I came to apologize. It was the closest thing to a real apology I could expect from him." "Apology accepted," I replied formally. "Good." He smiled with obvious relief. "Then the matter is settled. Pris is inviting you to dinner next Sunday. Nothing fancy, just a family dinner." The thought of sitting at a table with Pris looking at me with her appraising gaze made me shudder inwardly, but I nodded. "Okay, I'll be there." "Great. I'll pick you up at 6. John left shortly afterward, leaving me with a bag of scones, which I'd never particularly liked, and the feeling that a conversation that should have cleared things up had only made them worse. Dinner at John and Pris's was exactly what I expected, strained and awkward. Pris made fried chicken that was dry and flavorless, but I politely complimented her culinary talents. John talked about work, about the new car he planned to buy, about problems with the contractor who was repairing their roof. Ordinary, everyday topics that didn't require deep thought or emotional involvement. At one point, the conversation touched on my health. "How's your hearing, Alba?" Pris asked, putting on her salad. "John tells me you ordered a new hearing aid." "Yeah, I'll get it next week." "It must be frustrating not being able to hear properly," she said with fake sympathy. "I'm coping," I replied. "Fortunately, I spend most of my time alone, so I don't suffer from it too much." "Speaking of alone time," John interjected, "Pris and I were thinking, maybe you should consider a nursing home." I nearly choked on a piece of chicken. "A nursing home?" "Not now, of course," John added hastily. "But in the long run. You're not getting any younger, Mom. And since the pool incident, Pris and I have been worried about your safety." "Amazing concern," I said dryly, "especially from the man who pushed me into that pool." "See?" John turned to Pris. "She still can't let it go." "Alba," Pris leaned across the table to me, "a lot of people your age live in nursing homes. You'll be cared for by professionals there. You'll be safe. And you won't have to worry about me," I added, looking her straight in the eye. What a convenient solution. "You're not being fair," Pris straightened, offended by my bluntness. "We have your welfare in mind. My good is well provided for in my own home, thank you." "But what if you fall? Or get sick?" John insisted. "Who will help you?" "I have an emergency call system that you installed yourself. And the neighbors check on me every day." "That's not the same as professional care," Pris objected. "I don't need professional care yet," I cut her off. "I'm completely on my own." "Right now, yes," John agreed. "But that could change very quickly. And when it does, we want to be ready." I set my fork aside, suddenly losing my appetite. "I appreciate your concern," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But it's up to me to decide where and how I'm going to live. As long as I'm sane and able to take care of myself, I'll stay in my house." Pris and John exchanged glances, that special silent exchange between spouses that excludes everyone else. I could see the condescension in their eyes, the certainty that they were right. They had already decided my fate for me, just waiting for the right moment to make it happen. "Of course, Mom," John said at last. "It's your decision. We just wanted you to know what we thought." The rest of the dinner passed in awkward silence, punctuated only by small talk about the weather and the latest news. When John drove me home, I felt a huge sense of relief as I crossed the threshold of my house. Sitting in my favorite chair with a cup of hot tea, I thought about the contrast between the attitudes toward my age in my family and in academia. To John and Pris, I was an infirm old woman in need of supervision and possibly placement in a nursing home. To Harris Wilmot and his colleagues, I was a valuable source of knowledge and experience whose opinion could change the understanding of an entire era. The letter from Harris lay on the table next to my chair. I reread it, enjoying the respectful tone, the reference to Dr. Braxton, the acknowledgement of my merit and expertise. This is how the elderly should be treated, not as a burden, but as a treasure trove of wisdom and knowledge. I remembered a conference in Cairo 5 years ago, a few months before Edgar's death. Young archaeologists were lining up to talk to me, to ask questions, to get advice. Professors from leading universities quoted my work in their speeches. The curator of the Cairo Museum personally took Edgar and me on a tour of the vaults, showing artifacts not available to ordinary visitors. And now my own son thinks I'm incapable of living on my own. The bitter irony of the situation didn't escape me. Those who knew me only by works and reputation valued me more than those who should have loved me simply for what I was. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit the truth. I would never get the respect I deserved from John. Not as a scientist, not as a mother. To him, I will always be the one who chose career over family, who embarrassed him in front of his friends, who didn't live like normal people. And no amount of advances, no amount of discoveries that have changed the understanding of human history will change that. This realization was painful, but also liberating. I no longer had to try to earn his approval or respect. I could just be me, Alba Braxton, an archaeologist, an explorer, a woman who had seen more history with her own eyes than most people read in books. I picked up a sheet of paper and began writing a reply to Harris. My fingers, curled by arthritis, moved slowly but surely. I may not have been able to hear properly. I may have struggled to get around without a cane. I may have needed reading glasses, but my mind was sharper than ever. And there were people in this world who appreciated that. The decision came not as a sudden insight, but as a quiet realization. Just as an archaeologist slowly peels away layer after layer to get to the truth hidden in the ground, I was slowly freeing myself from illusions about my family. The incident at the pool was only the catalyst for a process that began long ago. That morning, I woke up with an extraordinary clarity of thought. I will no longer spend the rest of my days trying to earn the respect of those who are incapable of giving it. John, Pris, Heather, they will never see me for the person I am. To them, I'll always be a burden, an eccentric old woman to be taken care of and ignored. I dialed John's number, determined not to delay the inevitable. "Mom?" He answered after the third ring, his voice sounding surprised. I didn't usually call him, waiting for his weekly visits. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing urgent," I answered. "I just wanted to let you know that I won't be able to make it to lunch next Sunday." "Why?" He sounded annoyed. "We had an agreement. I have other plans." "What other plans?" He didn't try to hide his disbelief. In his world, an 83-year-old woman couldn't have plans other than family events. "I'm starting work on cataloging my collection," I replied. "It will take up all my time in the coming weeks." "Cataloging? You mean those old shards you keep in the basement?" I gripped the receiver tighter, holding back my irritation. "They're not old shards, John. They're archaeological artifacts, many of which have significant scientific value." "And that's more important than Sunday dinner with your family?" "At the moment, yes." There was a pause. I could picture his face, a mixture of annoyance and bewilderment. "Was this about that nursing home talk?" He finally asked. "If so, Pris and I were just suggesting an option. No one's going to force you there." "That's not the point, John. I've just decided to focus on the work that has always inspired me." "At your age?" The skepticism in his voice was almost palpable. "My age has nothing to do with my knowledge and experience," I replied. "By the way, I got an invitation to give a lecture at the local museum. Turns out the director read my work back in college." "Museum? That little local history museum downtown?" John chuckled. "Surely they just couldn't afford a real expert." His words were meant to jab, but I found them sliding across the surface of my mind without penetrating deeper. John's opinion no longer held the importance I'd given it. Maybe, I agreed neutrally. In any case, I'll be busy for the next few weeks. Give my apologies to Pris. I hung up without waiting for his response. It was a small act of defiance, but it gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in a long time. The basement of my house was my personal museum. Edgar had insisted that when we bought the house in Gladstone, we choose one that had a dry, well-insulated basement for our collection. Here, on shelves and in special cabinets with drawers, we kept evidence of my life. Fragments of pottery, small statuettes, beads, arrowheads, coins, everything Edgar and I had collected over the years. Each item was carefully packaged, labeled with the place and date of discovery. Descending the steep stairs to the basement was a challenge, but I made it, holding on tightly to the railing. When I turned on the light, I froze for a moment, overwhelmed by a wave of memories. Here, among these ancient objects, I felt Edgar's presence more strongly than anywhere else. I walked over to the work table we had set up against the far wall. On it were the field journals I'd brought here a few days ago, planning to get started. Next to it was a lamp with a magnifying glass, an indispensable aid for eyes that were no longer as sharp as they used to be. The first thing I pulled out was the old laptop. Edgar had insisted on buying it shortly before he died, convincing me that a digital catalog would be more durable than a paper one. I turned on the computer, having some difficulty remembering the password. Creating a new file, I began methodically describing the first artifact, a clay figurine of a fertility goddess found in Anatolia in 1974. The work was slow. My fingers, twisted by arthritis, moved clumsily across the keyboard. I often made typos, which I had to correct. But I took my time. I had all the time in the world, or at least all the time left in my life. By the end of the day, I had only described a dozen items, but I felt satisfied with the work I had done. This catalog would become my legacy, a way to preserve the knowledge I had accumulated over a long life in archaeology. Maybe someday this collection will end up in a real museum, where new generations of students will be able to study these artifacts as I once did. The days merged into weeks. I established a routine for myself, working on the catalog in the morning, writing a response to Harris in the afternoon, and reading the latest archaeological journals, which I subscribed to despite their cost, in the evening. I didn't leave the house except to visit Dr. Chen for a new hearing aid and weekly trips to the grocery store. John called twice. The first time was to let me know that Heather took offense to my refusal to come to lunch. The second was to remind me to pay the utility bill, as if I could forget such mundane things. Both conversations were short and formal. I didn't ask about his life. He wasn't interested in mine. A call from the director of the Gladstone Museum of Natural History came as a surprise. Dr. Margaret Phelps, an energetic woman in her 50s, introduced herself and without much preamble got to the point. "Dr. Braxton, we are honored to have you living in our town," she said. "I read your work on Mesopotamian pottery in graduate school. Your research on the influence of trade routes on the spread of pottery techniques was groundbreaking." I felt a warmth spill over my chest. She was talking about a paper published 30 years ago, but discussing it as if it were a recent work. "That's very kind of you, Dr. Phelps," I replied. "Please call me Margaret. And it's not a courtesy, it's a fact. That's exactly why I'm calling. We're organizing a series of lectures on treasures of ancient civilizations for high school and college students. It would be wonderful if you would agree to give a lecture on your work in Mesopotamia." I was confused for a moment. It had been many years since I had given a public lecture. Would I still be able to hold an audience's attention? Would my memory fail me when I recounted the events of half a century ago? "I'm not sure," I started. "You'll have plenty of time to prepare," Margaret added quickly. "The lecture is scheduled for the 15th of next month, and we'll provide everything you need: a slide projector, a microphone, help with the presentation." The thought of diving back into the world of academic archaeology was tempting. To share my knowledge with young minds, to see in their eyes the same fire of inquiry that once burned in my own. "I'll do it," I said, surprising even myself with the determination in my tone. "Wonderful," Margaret exclaimed. "I'll email you all the details. You have email, don't you?" "Of course. I replied, slightly offended by the suggestion that I might be so technologically backward. I've been using email for 20 years. Margaret laughed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. It's just that some of my colleagues of your generation prefer traditional methods of communication. We exchanged email addresses, and I hung up the phone feeling energized. The upcoming lecture gave me a new purpose, a new focus for my work. I immediately started going over possible topics and approaches in my mind. Should I talk about our findings at Tel Halaf? Or focus on the broader topic of Bronze Age trade routes? Immersed in these thoughts, I barely heard the doorbell ring. When I opened it, I found Milo on the doorstep. Grandma! He smiled, but I could see worry in his eyes. Can I come in? I stepped back, letting him in. Milo walked into the living room and sat on the couch, tapping his fingers nervously on his knee, a gesture he'd inherited from Edgar. How are you feeling? He asked. It's been a long time. I'm fine, I replied, sitting down in the chair across from him. I'm working on cataloging the collection, and I got an invitation to give a lecture at the museum. Really? That's great. His enthusiasm seemed genuine. What's the lecture about? I haven't decided yet, probably about our excavations in Mesopotamia. The one where you and Grandpa found the royal tomb? I smiled, touched that he remembered that story. Exactly. Milo nodded, but then his face grew serious. Grandma, I came to talk about Daddy. He's concerned that you're distancing yourself from the family. I sighed. Of course, John couldn't just accept my decision. He needed to send a scout, in this case Milo, to find out what was going on. I'm not distancing myself, Milo. I'm just focusing on the work that matters to me. But you refuse to come to family dinners. You won't take Heather's calls. Heather called? That was news to me. Milo looked embarrassed. Well, not really. She asked Dad to ask if you're coming to Leela's birthday party next month. And John asked me that? He said he did, but you said no. I shook my head. Typical John. Create a story that makes me look guilty and him look like a caring son. He didn't ask me, Milo. But if he had, I really would have said no. Why? Milo looked genuinely puzzled. Leela would be upset. She asked about you. I doubt it, I replied dryly. The last time I saw Leela, she barely recognized me. Heather made sure I didn't play a significant role in her great-granddaughter's life. Milo lowered his eyes without arguing. He knew I was telling the truth. Look, Grandma, I realize that Daddy can sometimes be difficult, and what happened at the barbecue was unacceptable. But he's going through a rough patch right now. Work problems, Pris is unhappy with their financial situation. And that justifies his behavior? I interrupted. Just because he's going through a rough patch gives him the right to humiliate me in front of the whole family? No, of course not. Milo looked upset. I'm not trying to make excuses for him, just to explain. He wasn't always like this, you know. I know, I agreed more gently. He was once a little boy who followed his father on excavations, asking a million questions. A boy who wanted to be an archaeologist like us. What's changed? Milo asked quietly. I wondered. It was a question I had asked myself many times over the years. I don't know for sure. Maybe peer pressure as a teenager. Maybe he just decided that our lives were too unstable, too different from what he'd seen in his friends' families. I shrugged it off. At some point, he began to feel ashamed of us, of our work, of our lifestyle. And that shame eventually turned into contempt. Milo was silent, digesting my words. Then he leaned forward, taking my hands in his. Grandma, I'm not asking you to forgive Dad or to pretend it didn't happen. But maybe you could, I don't know, give him another chance? For the sake of the family? I looked into his eyes. Edgar's eyes, honest and direct. Milo genuinely wanted reconciliation, wanted his family to be whole. But he didn't realize that some rifts couldn't be healed by simple forgiveness. I'm not giving up on you, Milo, I said softly. You can always come to me, call me, write to me. But as for John and the others, I can't keep pretending that everything is okay, that their treatment of me doesn't hurt me every time we meet. They don't want to hurt you, Milo objected. They just don't understand. They never will, I finished for him. That's why I've decided to focus on the aspects of my life that bring me joy, not pain. On archaeology, on my research, on people who see me as a scientist instead of a helpless old woman. Milo looked upset, but didn't argue further. He knew I was right, even if he didn't want to admit it. "What should I tell Dad?" he finally asked. "The truth," I answered, "that I was alive and well and doing my job, that I hadn't disappeared and I wasn't going to die of loneliness. I just chose to spend what time I had left with dignity and self-respect." Milo nodded, though I could see that my answer didn't satisfy him completely. He'd been hoping for a compromise, some solution that would maintain some semblance of marital harmony. But sometimes the price of such a compromise is too high. When Milo left, I went back to my field diaries, preparing for the upcoming lecture. Flipping through the yellowed pages, written in my younger, more energetic handwriting, I felt the past come alive. Descriptions of finds, sketches of artifacts, notes on the stratigraphy of the dig, all brought me back to the days when the world was open to exploration and my body was strong and resilient. A few days after Milo's visit, a formal invitation arrived for Leela's birthday. A beautiful card with a picture of a princess. Leela was going through a princess phase, as Heather had once been, and a calligraphic inscription that read, "Welcome to Leela Lamb's 5th birthday party." At the bottom, Heather's hand added, "We hope you can make it, Grandma. Leela would love to see you." I put the invitation aside, feeling neither joy nor excitement. If I went, Heather would be tense, afraid I might say or do something embarrassing. John would be watching my every move, ready to step in and help at a moment's notice. Pris would exchange meaningful glances with the other adults as I spoke. And Leela barely knows me thanks to her mother's efforts. That same day, an email arrived from Margaret Phelps confirming the date of my lecture at the museum, the 15th of next month. I opened my calendar and noted the date. Then I glanced at the invitation to Leela's birthday party, the 12th of the same month. Two events separated by only 3 days. Normally, this wouldn't have been a problem, but at my age, such pressures required careful energy planning. The birthday trip, the interaction with my family, the inevitable emotional strain, all of it would exhaust me to the point where I might not be in shape for the lecture. The choice wasn't that difficult. I wrote a polite reply to Heather, letting her know that I would unfortunately be unable to attend Leela's birthday party due to prior commitments, without specifying which ones. Margaret then replied, confirming her participation in the lecture and requesting more information about the format and expected audience. Closing my laptop, I felt not regret, but relief. For the first time in a long time, I was making decisions based not on family expectations or a sense of obligation, but on what was important and valuable to myself. It was a small step off the beaten path, but it opened the way to a new phase of my life, a phase where I could once again be Dr. Alba Braxton, an archaeologist and scientist, and not just John's old mom. Leela's birthday fell on a clear Saturday the 12th. I knew this because I double-checked the date on the invitation before I sent my rejection. I also knew because my phone started ringing at 9 in the morning. First Heather, then John, then Heather again. I didn't answer any of the calls. Instead, I was preparing for an archaeological symposium that was scheduled to begin in 2 hours at the Eastern Regional Branch of the National Archaeological Museum. Margaret called me a week ago, excited and joyful. "Dr. Braxton, I have amazing news. After hearing about your upcoming lecture, several professors from leading universities have expressed a desire to come and meet with you. The National Museum has offered to host a one-day symposium in your honor. We'll call it The Legacy of Dr. Alba Braxton, Rethinking the Archaeology of Mesopotamia." I was stunned. A symposium in my honor? At a branch of the National Museum? It seemed almost unbelievable. I picked out my best suit, navy blue with an ivory silk blouse. I pinned a silver scarab brooch to my lapel, not the one I'd lost in the pool, but another one given by my colleagues for my 70th birthday. I tucked my gray hair into a neat bun and applied a minimum of makeup. Looking in the mirror, I saw not only an old woman with a wrinkled face, but also an archaeologist whose work is still cited in scientific journals. A woman who had spent decades uncovering the secrets of ancient civilizations. Calling a cab was easier than arguing with John about why I was going to the symposium and not Leela's birthday party. The driver was a young man with pleasant manners. He helped me into the car and carefully placed my cane in the back seat. "To the National Museum, ma'am," he asked when he heard the address. Is there an important event there today? An archaeological symposium, I answered. Oh, interesting. He sounded genuinely interested. Are you interested in archaeology? I smiled. You could say that. I am an archaeologist, or have been for most of my life. All the way to the museum, I answered his questions about archaeological expeditions, about the most interesting finds, about life in the field camps. He listened with such genuine interest that I felt younger and more energetic. Margaret met me at the entrance to the museum. An energetic middle-aged woman in an elegant suit, she radiated enthusiasm and competence. Dr. Braxton! She shook my hand with both hands. What an honor to finally meet you in person. Let me show you to the conference room. Some of the participants have already arrived and are looking forward to meeting you. She took me under her arm, helping me up the marble steps of the main entrance, but she did so not condescendingly, as John had done, but with the natural care of a valued guest. We walked slowly down a spacious hall with high ceilings and antique statues. At the far end, we could see a professionally designed symposium poster with a photograph of me, well retouched from the excavations in Syria, standing next to Edgar at the entrance to a newly discovered tomb. The museum's conference room was impressive, a spacious room with an amphitheater and state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment. I expected to see a few dozen participants, but the hall was filled almost completely. About 100 people, professors in strict suits, students with tablets and laptops, representatives of scientific journals and research foundations, were talking softly, leafing through programs, looking through presentation slides. When we entered, the conversations quieted down. All heads turned in our direction. And then something happened that I didn't expect at all. People started applauding. Not polite, formal clapping, but sincere, energetic applause. Some even stood up. I froze in the doorway, stunned. Margaret smiled, watching my reaction. I told you were appreciated here, she said quietly. The next 2 hours passed like a blur. Professor Anderson, a gray-haired man with an impeccable reputation in academia, introduced me to the audience, listing my scholarly accomplishments as if I were Howard Carter, who had discovered Tutankhamun's tomb. Dr. Chang, an elegant woman who heads an archaeology department at a prestigious university, talked about how my work had inspired a generation of women to pursue archaeology. A young professor from Oxford presented a study based on my methodology for dating pottery. When it was my time to speak, I walked up to the stage with the help of a cane, feeling my knees shaking, not only from arthritis, but also from excitement. I hadn't performed at this level in years. What if I forget my thoughts? If my voice is too weak? If the younger generation found my methods outdated? But as soon as I began to speak, all doubts vanished. I talked about my excavations with Edgar at Tel Halafa, about the discovery of the royal tomb, about how we had revised the dating of an entire archaeological complex because of the unique ornamentation on the walls. The words flowed freely, as if I were back in the field explaining the stratigraphy of the excavation to my colleagues. The audience listened with absolute attention. No one yawned, checked their phones, or whispered. When I finished, there was applause, long, sincere. Several people came up with questions, intelligent and insightful. A young woman, the leader of an expedition to Iraq, asked to sign a copy of my book, recently reissued by a leading university publisher. Your work has completely changed my understanding of ancient trade routes, she said, looking at me with undisguised admiration. Thanks to you, I have been able to interpret our recent findings correctly. I signed the book, tears welling up in my eyes. This moment of recognition, this affirmation that my life, my work mattered, was more valuable than any family celebration where I was seen as a burden or an object of ridicule. The formal part of the symposium was followed by an elegant buffet in the atrium of the museum. I sat in a comfortable chair, surrounded by my colleagues, answering questions, sharing memories, discussing the latest trends in archaeology. No one rushed me, no one interrupted me, no one looked at their watches impatiently. No one made condescending remarks about my age or state of health. Here I was, not an old grandmother, but a respected scientist whose opinion was valued. When I returned home after the symposium, I felt refreshed. as if I had shed the weight of my years. Even the pain in my joints seemed less acute. I made tea and sat in my favorite chair, going over the day's events in my mind. The contrast between the attitudes toward my age and experience in my family and in academia was stark. The phone rang, snapping me out of my reverie. John's name popped up on the display. I didn't answer it. A minute later, the phone rang again, this time Heather's. I turned the sound off. I didn't need to hear their accusations and recriminations to know what they would say. The doorbell rang around 6 in the evening. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. John stood on the doorstep, his face red with anger. Behind him, Heather stood a little farther away, arms crossed over her chest and lips pressed together. "What's the meaning of this, Mom?" John began without greeting. "Why didn't you come to Leela's birthday party?" "Hello, John," I answered calmly. "Hello, Heather. Would you like to come in?" They walked into the living room without taking off their outerwear, a clear sign that they weren't planning on staying long. John remained standing, though I pointed to the couch. "We've been waiting for you all day," he continued in an accusing tone. Leela asked where her great-grandmother was. What were we supposed to tell her? "The truth," I replied, "that I had other plans." "What other plans could be more important than your great-granddaughter's birthday?" Heather intervened. Her voice shook with barely contained anger. "There was an archaeological symposium in my honor at the National Museum today," I said. "Leading experts were discussing my scientific legacy." John snorted. "Legacy? What legacy? A few old papers no one reads?" "Actually," I pointed out, keeping my cool, "my work is still cited in leading scientific journals. And, judging by today's event, my legacy is inspiring a new generation of archaeologists." "And that's more important than your own family?" Heather almost screamed. "More important than the feelings of a 5-year-old? Heather," I looked her straight in the eye, "let's be honest. Leela barely knows me. You've made sure I don't play a significant role in her life. My visits have always been infrequent and brief at your insistence." "That is not true," she objected, but her cheeks reddened. "It's the absolute truth, and we all know it." I turned to John. "Just as we know that you don't see me as a mother, but as a burden. A problem to be solved. Perhaps by putting me in a nursing home." John seemed shocked by my candor. "Mom, you're being unfair. We care about you." "You care that I don't compromise your comfort," I corrected him. "That I conform to your expectations of a proper grandmother. Quiet, obedient, grateful for any attention, so that I wouldn't remind you of my real life and accomplishments that you never appreciated." "That's it," John shook his head. "It's all about your resentment. You can't forgive us for not admiring your great discoveries." "No, John, it's not about resentment. It's about respect. It's about recognizing who I am. Today at the symposium, people who only know me from my work showed more respect for my expertise than you have over the years. We've never made fun of you." John was indignant. "No? How about the pool, John? How about the fact that you pushed your 83-year-old mother into the water knowing about my arthritis and hearing aid? How about the whole family laughing while I floundered trying not to drown?" Silence ensued. John and Heather exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such a direct confrontation. "It was a joke," John finally said, but his voice sounded uncertain. "A cruel joke that could have ended in tragedy," I said. "And it was telling that neither of you apologized sincerely. Not one of you acknowledged that it was wrong." "We're not here to talk about that." Heather tried to change the subject. "We're here to talk about Leela's birthday. I want to tell you that I'm not going to play this game anymore. I won't pretend that we're a happy, loving family. I won't show up to events where I'm not wanted. I will not tolerate neglect and ridicule." "Are you, giving up on us?" Heather looked shocked. "I'm giving up the role you imposed on me," I corrected her. "The role of the frail old woman who should be grateful for any attention. I choose to spend my remaining years with dignity, doing what I love, surrounded by people who see me for who I am." "That's crazy," John shook his head. "You can't just give up your family." "I'm not giving up on family, John. I'm setting boundaries. If you want to visit me, respecting my interests and dignity, you'll always be welcome. But if you come to make fun of my work or insinuate that I'm in a nursing home, I'd rather you didn't come at all." There was a long pause. John looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, a mixture of anger, bewilderment, and maybe a dash of respect. "Come on, Heather," he said finally. "It's no use talking to her when she's in this mood." They left without a goodbye, slamming the door louder than necessary. I stayed in my chair feeling a strange mix of emotions, bitter about the breakup, but also relieved that I'd finally told the truth I'd been hiding for so long. The phone rang an hour later. It was Milo. "Grandma?" His voice sounded worried. "I just talked to Dad. He said you're giving up your family." "Of course he said that," I sighed. John was always prone to dramatization when it came to his own feelings. What really happened? I told him about the symposium, about John and Heather's visit, about our conversation. Milo listened without interrupting. "I understand you, Grandma," he said finally. "I really do. But isn't there any way to keep things going? Even with Leela?" "Milo," I said softly. "Leela doesn't know me. To her, I'm just an old woman who sometimes shows up at family gatherings. Heather has never encouraged our relationship. And frankly, I'm too tired of fighting for a place in the lives of people who don't want me there." "I want to," he said quietly. "I've always wanted to." I know you have, darling. And you'll always be welcome in my home. But I will no longer participate in family events where I'm seen as a burden." After talking to Milo, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. The next morning, an email arrived from Harris Wilmot. He wrote that he was at a conference in Boston where he met some colleagues who were attending a symposium in my honor. They told him about my talk and my ideas about the fines in Syria. Harris was delighted and invited me to Cambridge for a consultation. All expenses paid, of course. "Your opinion is invaluable, Dr. Braxton," he wrote. "No one knows the pottery of this period better than you. If you can come, it would be a tremendous honor for our research group." Without thinking long, I replied in agreement. Then I got up and headed for the bedroom, where my old suitcase, the same one I traveled with on the expedition, was stored in the closet. Shabby, with airport stickers from all over the world, it was a witness to my travels and discoveries. I began packing for my trip to Cambridge. Every movement made my joints ache, but I ignored it. I folded clothes, books, pictures of artifacts that might be useful for discussion. I worked methodically as I had become accustomed to over the years of expeditions, only the essentials, nothing unnecessary. Looking at the nearly packed suitcase, I felt the bitterness of being separated from my family. John, for all his faults, was my only son. Heather was my granddaughter. Leela was my great-granddaughter. Breaking family ties is always painful, no matter the circumstances. But along with the bitterness was a sense of liberation. I no longer had to live by other people's rules, endure neglect and ridicule, pretend I wasn't hurt by cruel jokes and condescending remarks. I could be me, not John's mom or Heather's grandmother, but Dr. Alba Braxton, whose work had changed the understanding of ancient civilizations.